New kings and kingdoms. Many new dynasties emerged after the 17th century. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 17th and 12th centuries. Map 1 Major kingdoms 17th-12th centuries. Locate the Gurjara Pratiharas, Rashtrakutas, Palas, Cholas and Chauhans. Can you identify the present-day states over which they exercised control? Comment this. Kashmir, Sais, Tibet, Arab of Multan, Arabs of Mansura, Indraprastha, Chamanas, Kanauj, Gurjara Pratiharas, Prayaga, Benaras, Chandelas, Paramaras, Anarta, Paharpur, Palas, Kamrupa, Tibet, Nepal, Utkala, Gangas, Kalinga, Rashtrakutas, Malkher, Mayakheta, Eastern Chalukya Vengi, Cholas, Cheras, Pandas, Lakshadweep, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, fluctuating frontier. Indus River, Jhelum River, Bias River, Ganga River, Jamuna River, Chambal, Brahmaputra River, Mahanadi River, Narmada River, Tapi River, Godavari River, Krishna River, Tungabhadra River, Kaveri River. Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea. The emergence of new dynasties. By the 17th century, there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates or samantas. They were expected to bring gifts for their kings or overlords, be present at their courts and provide them with military support. As samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Mahasamanta, Mahamandaleshwara, the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid-8th century, Dantidurga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha, literally the golden Om. When this ritual was performed with the help of Brahmanas, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not one by birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba Mayurasarman and the Gurjara Pratihara Harichandra were Brahmanas who gave up their traditional professions and looked to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. Figure wall relief from Cave 15, Ellora, showing Vishnu as Narasimha, the man lion. It is a work of the Rashtrakuta period. Do you think being born as a Kshatriya was important in order to become a ruler during this period? Comment this. Administration in the kingdoms. Many of these new kings adopted high-sounding titles such as Maharaja Adhiraja, Great King, Overlord of Kings, Tribhuvana Chakravartin, Lord of the Three Worlds, and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their samantas as well as with associations of peasants, traders, and brahmanas. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produced. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. 400 taxes. The inscription of the Cholas who ruled in Tamil Nadu refer to more than 400 terms for different kinds of taxes. The most frequently mentioned tax is bhetti, taken not in cash but in the form of forced labor, and kadamai or land revenue. There were also taxes on thatching the house, the use of a ladder to climb palm trees, a cess on succession to family property, etc. Are any such taxes collected today? Comment this. In what ways was this form of administration different from the present day system? Comment this. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue were generally recruited from influential families and positions were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held these positions. Prashastis and land grants. Prashastis contain detail that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors. For example, these were composed by learned brahmanas who occasionally helped in the administration. The achievement of Nagabhatta. Many rulers describe their achievement in Prashastis. You read about the Prashasti of the Gupta ruler Samudragupta last year. One Prashasti written in Sanskrit and found in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh, describes the exploits of Nagabhatta, a Pratihara king, as follows. The king of Andhra, Sandhava, Sindh, Vidarbha, part of Maharashtra, and Kalinga, part of Odisha, fell before him even as he was a prince. He won a victory over Chakrajuddha, the ruler of Kanuj. He defeated the king of Bhanga, part of Bengal, Anartha, part of Gujarat, Malaba, part of Madhya Pradesh, Kirata, forest peoples, Turaska, Turks, Vatsa, Matsa, both kingdoms in North India. Also see if you can find some of the areas mentioned in the inscription or map 1. Other rulers made similar claims as well. Why do you think they made these claims? Comment this. Kings often rewarded brahmanas by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates, which were given to those who received the land. Figure. This is a set of copper plates recording a grant of land made by a ruler in the 9th century, written partly in Sanskrit and partly in Tamil. The ring holding the plates together is secured with a royal seal to indicate that this is an authentic document. What was given with the land? This is a part of the Tamil section of a land grant given by the Cholas. We have demarcated the boundaries of the land by making earthen embankments as well as by planting thorny bushes. This is what the land contains: fruit-bearing trees, waterland, gardens and orchards, trees, wells, open spaces, pasture lands, a village, anthills, platforms, canals, ditches, rivers, silt-laden land, tanks, granaries, fish ponds, beehives, and duplex. He who receives the land can collect taxes from it. He can collect the taxes imposed by judicial officers as fine, the tax on betel leaves, that unwoven cloth, as well as on vehicles. He can build large rooms with upper stories made of baked bricks. He can get large and small wells dug. He can plant trees and thorny bushes. If necessary, he can get canals constructed for irrigation. He should ensure that water is not wasted and that embankments are built. List all the possible sources of irrigation mentioned in the inscription and discuss how these might have been used. Comment this. Unusual for the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources including inscriptions, documents, eyewitness accounts, and earlier histories to write his account. Unlike the writers of Prashastis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Warfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties was based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kanauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gurjara, Pratihara, Rashtrakuta and Pala dynasties fought for control over Kanauj. Because there were three parties in this long-drawn conflict, historians often describe it as a tripartite struggle. Look at map 1 and suggest reasons why these rulers wanted to control Kanuj and the Ganga Valley. Comment this. Sultan, an Arabic term meaning ruler. As we will see, page 62 to 66, the rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So, when they attacked one another kingdom, they often chose to target temples, which were sometimes extremely rich. You will read more about this in chapter 5. One of the best known of such rulers is Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He ruled from 997 to 1030 and extended control over parts of Central Asia. Iran and the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided the subcontinent almost every year. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath, Gujarat. Much of the wealth Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital city as Ghazni. Sultan Mahmud was also interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al-Biruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as the Kitabul Hind, remains an important source for historians. He consulted Sanskrit scholars to prepare this account. Look at map 1 again and discuss why the Chahamanas may have wanted to expand their territories. Comment this. Other kings who engaged in warfare included the Chahamanas, later known as the Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadavalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Chahamana ruler was Prithviraja III, 1168 to 1192, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Mahmud Ghori. Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him the very next year in 1192. A closer look, the Cholas. Yadavas, Chalukyas under Vikramaditya VI, Kallani, Kadambas, Badami, Kakatiyas, Kalinga, South Kalinga, Vengi, Banavasi, Gangavadi, Nolambavari, Cholas, Kanchi, Urayur, Madurai, Pandas, Thanjavur, Gangaikonda, Cholapuram, fluctuating frontier. Narmada River, Tapi River, Mahanadi River, Godavari River, Krishna River, Tungabhadra River, Penna River, Kaveri River. Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal. The Chola Kingdom and its neighbors. From Urayur to Thanjavur, how did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chiefly family known as the Muttarayur held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttarayur in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumbhashudini there. The successors of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of this kingdom. Rajaraja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. He also recognized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son, Rajendra I, continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. Splendid temples and bronze sculptures. The big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were centers of craft production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The produce of this land. The temple at Gangaikonda Cholapuram, notice the way in which the roof tappers also look at the elaborate stone captures used to decorate the outer walls. Went into maintaining all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it: priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the hub of economic, social and cultural life as well. Among the craft associated with temples, the making of bronze image was the most distinctive. Chola bronze images are considered amongst the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Agriculture and irrigation. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. Look at map 2 again. Notice that the river Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provides the necessary moistures for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large-scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled other areas. In the delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding and canals had to be constructed too. A Chola bronze sculpture. Notice how carefully it is decorated. To find out how these images were made, see chapter 6. Figure a 9th century sluice gate in Tamil Nadu. It regulated the outflow of water from a tank into the channels that irrigation the fields. A sluice gate is traditionally a wood or metal barrier which is commonly used to control water levels and flow rates in rivers and canals. Carry water to the field. In many areas, two crops were grown in a year. Grown in a year. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation's work required planning, organizing, labor, and resources. Maintaining these works and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers people as well as people living in village book an active interest in these activities. The administration of the empire. How was the administration organized? Settlements of peasants known as Yuar became prosperous with the spread of irrigation. Agriculture groups of such villages formed larger unit called Nadu. The village council and the Nadu performed several village council and the Nadu performed several administrative functions, including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants of the Bhellala caste exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of the central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Mavendavelan, a Velan or peasant serving three kings, area chief, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with impeppered officers, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. Types of land. Chola inscription mentions several categories of land. Velan Vagai, land of non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Brahmadaya, land gifted to Brahmanas. Salabhoga, land for the maintenance of a school. Devadana, Tirumatu Kakkani, land gifted to temples. Palichadanadam, and land donated to Jaina institutions. We have seen that Brahmanas often received land grants or Brahmandaya. As a result, a large number of Brahmana settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of South India. Each Brahmandaya was looked after by an assembly of Shava of prominent Brahmana landowners. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their discussions were recorded in details in inscription. Often on the stone walls of temples, associations of traders known as nagarams also occasionally performed administrative function in towns. Inscription from Uttaramerur in Chengalpattu district, Tamil Nadu provide details of the way in which the Sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate communities to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Names of those eligible to be members of these communities were written on small tickets of palm leaves. These tickets are put into an earthenware pot from which a young boy was asked to take out the ticket, one by one for each committee. Inscription and text. Who could be a member of a Sabha? The Uttaramerur inscription lays down. All those who wish to become members of the Sabha should be owner of land from which land revenue is collected. They should have their own homes. They should be between 35 and 75 years of age. They should have knowledge of the Vedas. They should be well versed in administrative matters and honest. If anyone has been a member of any committee in the last 3 years, he cannot become a member of another committee. Anyone who has not submitted his accounts and those of his relatives cannot contest the election. Do you think Oman participated in these assemblies? In your view, are lotteries useful in choosing members of committees? Comment this. While inscriptions tells us about kings and powerful men, here is an excerpt from the Periya Puranam, a 12th century Tamil work, which inform us about the lives of ordinary men and women. On the outskirts of Adanur was a small hamlet of Pahiyas, a name used for a social group considered outcast by Brahmanas and Bellas, studded with a small hut under old thatches and inhabited by agrarian laborers engaged in menial occupation. In the threshold of the huts covered with strips of leather, laden chicken moved about in groups. Dark children who wore bracelets of blanks iron were prancing about carrying little puppies. In the shade of the Marudu Arjuna trees, a female laborer put her baby to sleep on a sheet of leather. There were mango trees from whose branches drums are hanging, and under the coconut palms in little hollows on the ground, tiny-headed bitches lay after whelping. The red-crested cocks crowed before dawn, calling the brownie prayer plural to their day's work, and by day, under the shade of the kanji tree, spread of the voice of the wavy-haired Pulaya women singing as they were husking paddy. Do you think Oman participated in these assemblies? In your view, are lotteries useful in choosing members of committees? Comment this. Were there any Brahmanas in this hamlet? Describe all the activities that were taking place in the village. Why do you think temple inscription ignored these activities? Comment this. China under the Tang dynasty. Elsewhere. In China, an empire was established under the Tang dynasty, which remained in power for about 300 years, from the 17th to the 10th centuries. Its capital, Xi'an, was one of the largest cities in the world, visited by Trangs, Iranians, Indians, Japanese, and Koreans. The Tang Empire was administered by a bureaucracy recruited through an examination, which was open to all who wished to appear for it. The system of selecting officials remained in place with some changes till 1911. In what ways was this system different from those prevalent in the Indian subcontinent? Comment this. Imagine you are present in an election for a Sabha. Describe what you see and hear. Comment this. Let's recall. Do this. Keywords: Samanta, temple, Nadu, Sabha. Let's understand. Let's discuss. Let's do. Do this and comment this.